Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala nabiyyina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Welcome to another Nikah Masterclass monthly live stream. I know it's been a few months since we've had our monthly live stream, but inshallah, make dua for us so that we are consistent. I'm very excited today. Our topic is the prenups, the compatibility hack. And we have, mashallah, our guest today, who I'm actually meeting for the first time, attorney and scholar, Sheikh Ali Tawfiq. If you can please introduce yourself, inshallah. First time meeting you as well.
Yeah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. It's a pleasure to be here to do this event with you all. So I'm actually from the Maryland area, the DMV as we call it, not the Department of Motor Vehicles. I went to the Islamic Seminary from 2010 to 2016. I returned to the DC area where I went to law school, and I practice in 5 states, alhamdulillah. And so I primarily do like Islamic estate planning and Islamic prenuptial agreements, and also mediation arbitration. So prenuptial agreements are something that, there's a lot that's said about it, a lot of stigma associated with it. Inshallah, we can clarify those.
Alhamdulillah, it's a pleasure to meet somebody else who's, kind of overlapping in practice areas. When I felt like when I first started, there weren't too many Muslim attorneys in this area who are trying to bridge the gap between American law and Islamic law. I do a lot of the divorce side, of course, and that's primarily what I do is the divorce litigation. I've been pushing for prenups, just seeing how ugly divorces are in the Muslim community. And as you said, the goal is, inshallah, with Nikah Masterclass and today in particular, to try to address that stigma. And I was actually in Dallas this last week. I attended the Qalam graduation, and I was talking to one of the shuyukh, and he mentioned that, mashallah, you're doing really good work. And the only suggestion I have is I think there needs to be a rebrand, right? A rebranding from prenups, because there's this negative connotation from the media and celebrities and things like that, and really retake and own that there is an Islamic marriage contract, and how can we make sure that we are implementing that in our marriages. So I think it's really important. And so the first thing I guess I'll ask you is, how do we start the shift of the stigma away from prenuptial agreements as, somebody would consider a divorce document? How can we make that shift to make it more palatable for the Muslim community?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing people, I think, need to be exposed to first is what a prenuptial agreement even looks like. And people who review prenuptial agreements know that the divorce section of an agreement is actually not the significant portion. It's all about clarifying financial responsibilities, financial roles within the marriage itself. And once those are kind of handled, then the divorce side of things doesn't really need to be fleshed out as much.
Yeah, subhanAllah. And, one way that we like to kind of, quote unquote, market prenuptial agreements is that it's actually not a document for divorce, but rather it's a tool to align yourselves. Do you agree with that? And can you maybe expand on that notion?
Yeah, absolutely. So both Muslims and non-Muslims alike, when they enter into a marriage, they're not fully sure what their financial arrangement is going to look like. And one of the most important things for premarital counseling in general is a conversation on finances. Now, the more you keep it vague, the more opportunity you have for a conflict in the marriage. And I'm not even talking about the legal and the divorce side. So if you don't have these conversations before you enter into a marriage, you will have conflict. Every marriage has conflict. If you don't have conflict, it's not a marriage. But being able to have mature conversations and, preset expectations that were discussed beforehand help you align yourself better and be able to resolve conflict better, as opposed to thinking of it as, all right, how much am I going to walk away with if I decide to leave the marriage?
And you're exactly, finances is obviously one of the fundamental parts of a marriage. Finances is one of the primary reasons for divorce, whether that's different expectations of wealth or different ways that people handle wealth. One's a saver, one's a spender. And so having that conversation up front, as you mentioned, can help reduce conflict. Absolutely. So what should a person start thinking about as they're thinking about getting a prenup, or even just thinking about marriage?
Yeah, I mean, there's the way I like to frame it is like there are two different like professionals or like areas that you kind of need to explore before you get married. One is like the premarital counseling side in terms of how you navigate your marriage, and the second is how you legally navigate your marriage. And each one has its own set of questions, and there's overlap, but one has a little bit more, stricter red lines, which would be the legal side, as opposed to like how you're going to spend or how you're going to budget, which would be more of like the counseling side. When people are looking to, make a prenup or trying to, I guess, enter into a marriage, I won't say for the first time, but exploring a marital agreement for the first time, they have to think about how they expect property ownership to look like, right? There's this understanding that what's mine is ours, what's yours is ours, and what's ours is also ours. But in practice, that's not how we operate as human beings. We kind of tend to have some level of ownership of our own of assets, and we distinguish those. And so it's important for us to really define what that looks like and create scenarios. What's going to happen when, let's say, there are kids in a relationship and one of us decides to like not work anymore? Those conversations need to happen beforehand. Yeah.
And so, you mentioned this concept of, I think what you're getting at, marital property, right? Marital property meaning what's mine is ours, yours is ours, ours is ours, from the moment you get married to the moment, God forbid, if you get divorced. How is that, in terms of the natural disposition of human beings, as you kind of mentioned? That's not, it's a legal fiction, right? When
Yeah.
we are getting married, it's like the state is putting this on top of you, saying, hey, you need to kind of reverse your psychology, you need to think differently, and now we're putting this kind of uncomfortable framework on your assets. And I think for a lot of people, that's the first time they actually realize that is when they're going through a divorce.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there in the non-Muslim world, you have people who are living together for years and years and years, and then when they enter into this, let's say, marriage, they understand that the convolution of property rights is not exactly what they're looking for. They have been functioning together for a long time as what we would consider a married couple, but so this is also very unnatural for the non-Muslims here. And in our communities, there has this, we're like, okay, well, if the state is imposing this on us, then it must be right. And so let's just try to reverse our mentalities and our psyches, but ultimately it does not work out. It just doesn't really pan out that way.
And that imposition is also, in family law, but also the other areas that we both practice is estate planning as well, that the kind of the generic state law is everything is together. You're considered one human being, and property is, all mixed together. But Islamically, there's clear definition of this is your property, this is my property. So much so when it comes to joint property, for example, with rights of survivorship, that's also a little foreign to Islamic law, if you agree.
Absolutely. So, I mean, you will find many, I guess, law-abiding Muslim couples, and I mean it's like Islamic law-abiding Muslim couples who really want to do what the inheritance rights of Islam are, but they will, for example, draft a will, and then because of the right of survivorship concept, and also because of the marital property concept, whatever their will says will kind of be disregarded. They're intending to follow Islamic law, but because they haven't prepared a prenuptial agreement or a marital agreement of any sort, those laws do not pan out the way that they expect. It affects, again, inheritance rules, and also has its own effects in marital rules.
So what are the most common, are the most important provisions in a prenuptial agreement from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, so the bulk, I won't say the bulk, yeah, the bulk of it is related to how property will be categorized and owned. So, separate property versus marital property, or in some states known as community property. And then aside from that, we have a whole other set of sections that I find really important conversation points. So, well, financially, we have, okay, how will taxes look? Because most people get married because of taxes, sometimes for love, but the tax piece is an important piece. Then you have spousal support during a marriage. What many people don't know is it's not just spousal support after marriage. There are rules that dictate how you're going to support one another, and so we have the husband providing for a wife, but that's not what the default rules are. It's kind of both-sided in many states. And then you have dispute resolution, which is my favorite. And so, like I said, every marriage not leads to conflict. Every marriage has conflict. That's just the nature of being in a relationship with someone. How you navigate that makes or breaks the family. And not the natural, but the general protocol that I found is when you have conflict, then you have all the community drama that's been created, then the next step is go to court. And so if you can create steps to mitigate the damage or to promote reconciliation through mediation and through arbitration, that can really restore families. And having that within a legal contract like a marital agreement or a prenup really makes a difference here. So that's one section that I find that I always enjoy speaking about when I'm talking to my clients about. Here's what your prenup says.
What about mahr?
Mahr as well, yes. Good start. So mahr is like the consideration for marriage, essentially, and it becomes a little... People don't always understand the role of mahr in a marriage, in a legal marriage, and it is a debt upon the, estate of the man if the man does not pay for it. And it's essential to kind of have that spelled out, mostly in the beginning of the prenuptial agreement. This marriage is happening with this mahr, and if this mahr does not exist, then there's no marriage. Making it legally enforceable.
Yeah, and I think that's the big part of it, right? Is that so many people will promise a big old mahr, 50 grand, and then when the time comes for divorce, that no state, maybe two states, I think Michigan and maybe New Jersey, I don't know if you know of any other states that will really even give any credence to a one-page nikah that you get at the masjid, but really the only way to enforce mahr is going to be through a prenuptial agreement.
Yeah, if it doesn't look like a prenup, they have no idea the judges have no idea how to properly manage it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so can you get a prenup and not use it?
Yeah, I think majority of people who draft prenups, who sign prenups, don't use their prenups.
Why is that?
Because a prenuptial agreement is only used if there is a dispute and that goes to court in the event of a dissolution or a divorce. The way I frame a prenup is this is the legal constitution of your marriage. And when you have a constitution, you're not constantly bringing it up in front of each other. It's just, that these are the rules that you live by.
Yeah, and I think that exercise of going through the prenup and going through the lawyers or the back and forth, the financial disclosures, and being able to have those frank, tough conversations even before your marriage starts actually strengthens the marriage. And I would argue, I don't have any data to support this, but that individuals with prenups may have a lower divorce rate than individuals without a prenup.
I would definitely support said made-up statistic as well.
Intuition,
absolutely. They say it about premarital counseling.
Yeah.
This is the same thing in the sense that you're having the same difficult conversations beforehand.
Yeah. How do you feel about prenuptial agreements as a due diligence tool in your courting process or in your process of finding the right individual?
Yeah, I think it's an essential tool. Really, even if a premarital agreement doesn't get to the signing stage, using that as a basis of having conversations, like a checklist, really changes how you view each other and how you're expecting to navigate your relationship. So, for example, if you ask them about your property, my property, and how, if I receive money, how would that be used in our relationship or in our marriage, you will get one of two different responses. One is a sensitivity that you wouldn't have known about beforehand. Maybe
Mm.
because, the person that you're courting grew up with a sensitivity towards money, or their family was very strict on them with regards to money. Or you'll find out, no, they actually believe that this, our finances are going to be the family's finances. And either way, that gives a lot of clarity in
Mm.
terms of how your relationship is going to look.
So when I think of compatibility, I'm thinking about compatibility in a few ways, and I mean they're all kind of related to money, but you have money, you have debt, you have goals, you even have kind of your view on Deen, and kind of the future of what your wealth looks like,
Yeah.
right? So when it comes to let's say, for example, faith, how can a prenuptial agreement help you discern or do due diligence on somebody's faith or on somebody's level of practice?
Yeah, I mean, there are different components here, and feel free to also share some of your ideas. But I feel like the conversation associated with what happens during, if there's children involved, does have some level of relevance. Understanding, like, okay, well, nowadays we have a lot of dual income households, and then the moment a child comes along, usually the wife or the mother is no longer going to be working, and then there's this potential sense of insecurity, and then
Mm.
the father figure also feels like they're taking on a lot of the burden of the finances. And so um, having those conversations to feel, I guess, a sense of compatibility, well, in terms of, like, is it better for you to work and then also hire a babysitter, or is there a family dynamic where we prefer that one person will be the sole breadwinner and the other person will be taking care of the house?
Mm.
So that's we have our division of responsibilities and roles that are encouraged within the Deen as well, because of uh, our natural dispositions. But at the same time, um, we might be inclined to do one thing over another, and this will help with that conversation and will with having a sense of harmony.
Yeah, subhanAllah. I mean, yeah, I think about it as well from kind of the faith perspective, being able to kind of do your due diligence or your verification on the Islamic side in terms of values and things like that. Because I think that the premarital conversation around money can show you kind of how people are thinking about the Deen. As it comes to, like you said, is the husband going to be the sole breadwinner? Is wife's money her own money, but husband's money is going to be used for the family? Questions like you mentioned about the wife staying home from work in order to raise the kids. But I also think that it connects with estate planning. And I know I keep on bringing it up, but I think it's important because if we define marital property the way that America does, or the West, or however you want to categorize it, that then also trickles down and causes problems in your estate planning, which also could potentially make it incompatible with Islamic law as well. So it's almost like you have to kind of define and fix the definition of property in your marriage so that it can have the right impact and the right distribution when it comes to the estate planning side and for your will and trust or whatever else you do for inheritance purposes.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I hold estate planning workshops or inheritance workshops throughout the country, the number one question is, the hardest part of Islamic estate planning is figuring out what you own,
Yeah.
because it's so mixed together. And so if you can't figure out what you own, you won't know what your family's rights are. And that can lead to an unintentional violation of God's law.
SubhanAllah.
Yeah.
SubhanAllah. And I'm just really just thinking about it right now, how closely connected these two topics are. But you're right, like the trickle down effect could be disastrous. The other thing in terms of compatibility as it comes to prenups is kind of debt, right? Because as you're going through the prenup process, you are getting a sense of how much debt each person has,
Yeah.
and the impacts of that. So maybe you can expand on the importance of knowing how much debt the other spouse has.
Yeah. I mean, we live in America. everyone has debt, or the majority of people have debt. We're not generally net positive. Most Americans are net negative.
Yeah.
But there is a correlation between the amount of debt you have and the amount of stress that you may have in your life as well, as an individual and as a family. And you also find that there are different styles of navigating debt, especially in the Muslim world. And so you'll have those that are more risk takers who will take on more debt, and then those that are less risk takers. And by having, this is where the compatibility comes in, where you don't know if your spouse or your prospective spouse is a risk taker, and sometimes not a good risk taker. And you may be responsible for debt that you never asked for, that you never had anything to do with.
Absolutely. Yeah, and from the debt perspective, of course, like if somebody's coming in with a whole bunch of credit cards, and it's, clothes and other things versus, student debt versus business debt versus, other types of debt might have different implications on, hey, do I really want to marry this person or not? Are we going to be compatible or not?
Yeah, absolutely.
Asset growth, right? For example, as a husband or as any married couple, you're always thinking about growth. You're thinking about becoming better as an individual. You're thinking about becoming better as a family, be that in your deen, be that in your dunya. And so how can a prenup help somebody figure out compatibility in terms of do we have a growth mindset or not? Or do you think it does?
It can, but I do want you to rephrase, but re-ask the question.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is, let's say, for example, my goal in life is I want to become, I want to have $100 million, right? And I want to build a business and I want to have all these investments. And the other side says they do, but we don't know for sure, right? Or there hasn't been any steps taken. Or somebody says that they're richer than they really are, or that they have more assets than they really say. So can a prenup help determine whether somebody is in that situation or not?
Yeah. So one of the interesting protocols that you kind of have to take when you're starting the prenuptial agreement process is a full disclosure of assets and liabilities. And so you're on the same playing field. You know what you're getting yourself into financially. You're not all of a sudden going to enter into a marriage and then you have constant creditors knocking on the door that you didn't know about. You know whether this person has how many businesses they've established, and if the disclosure of assets is not fair and accurate, then the prenuptial agreement won't be valid. And so, by just an unintended consequence of prenuptial agreements as they are in the States, is that you have a full understanding of this person's assets and liabilities.
What's something that you've seen your clients kind of walk away with, surprised? What are they most surprised about when they first learn about prenups or when they get a prenup done?
There are quite a few. This is a huge educational experience for everyone. The first being that joint property and community property are not the same. And I'll go, if need be, we can go into that.
Yeah, please, of course.
But the more important one is that people assume that by entering into a marriage, okay, we're just going to expect everything to be 50-50. And in case there's a separation, well, they just break it down the middle. And it's very much an eye-opener when they realize that is not the case. So the analogy I like to always use is your assets are like a Kit Kat. Okay. And if you do not have a marital agreement, during your marriage, it's like putting that Kit Kat in your pocket and it starts to melt. And then imagine if you want to separate and then keep one piece for yourself and one for your spouse. It's almost impossible. Instead, what happens is it breaks unevenly. Both people are not happy, and that piece that kind of melted together goes to the attorneys. So there's no 50-50 split.
Yeah.
It's a big chunk of it goes elsewhere. You're all left with a small piece, and no one's happy. Wow. Whereas a marital agreement kind of helps you preserve at least what you have. It's so the eye-opening part of it is that going to court is not as simple as, okay, just split it down the middle. You're literally suing your spouse.
Yeah. 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 Subhanallah.
Yeah,
Subhanallah.
I remember. I think like in Texas, it has like when you're issuing a divorce, not issuing, when you're petitioning for a divorce, um, you receive a cover letter essentially that says you are being sued, and then like people freak out and they message me and they're like, "What is this? I'm being sued by my spouse." No, it's just a divorce petition.
Yeah. 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 But yeah, exactly. You're going through a legal procedure where everything is going to be valued. Everything is going to be, all your balances are going to be checked. All your spending over the last few years are going to be checked, to try to, like you said, discern what pot are we dealing with, and then how are we going to divide it. I was just going to say, from my perspective, most people don't. What people are most shocked about is they don't realize that even my retirement account is part of the marital estate. Even the business that I started is part of the marital. So, the biggest thing that I get is that the title of this account or this asset doesn't matter.
Yeah.
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 That's
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you earn $1 and you deposit into your mom's account, that's your family's money. It just gets traced to wherever it goes.
Yeah. 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 Exactly. What about, have you any stories about prenups not working out, or like people going through the prenup process and not getting married?
I find that those who are in there are obviously there are cases where when a prenuptial agreement conversation comes up, the marriage doesn't work out, but it's not because of the prenuptial conversation. It's because now they're having very difficult conversations that they had kind of put off to after the marriage, and they had realized that there was no compatibility. So it's not because of the agreement that it didn't work out. It's because this agreement helped us realize that we're not compatible.
Exactly. And I would echo the exact same thing, that it's not the agreement, it's the conversation behind the agreement that I mean, even this year, I've had a few prenuptial agreements where they started negotiating, and they realized that, we're not compatible. We view money very differently, and we have a very different concept of what we're each supposed to get out of this marriage. 100%.
And that's a positive thing.
I agree. It's better that it happens at that point than, down the line, 5-10 years later, because like you said, a lot of people are not having these conversations. They just have expectations that expectations are going to be the same way that my parents ran things. My dad worked for, just generalizing very broadly. My dad worked, my mom stayed home, took care of the kids. And so that's how we're going to have our life. But our divorce rate compared to the previous generation is much higher. Our expectations and roles are very different than the previous generation. And so copy and pasting just doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, it doesn't. It really doesn't. It's just, what I find is that because we have two different legal principles or jurisdictions, we have both the American law and we have the Muslim law, it actually creates additional chaos. As opposed to trying to simplify things with, choosing one over the other. It just never works out that way.
And then you have culture, right? And then you have culture. Then you have the third player, which is culture, right? You have American law, Islamic law. Then you have your culture from your family. Maybe your spouse has culture from a different family. So everybody has all these different expectations. And then, things don't work out. And you see it really butt its head in the actual litigation or in the divorce process, where somebody goes and talks to a lawyer and they realize, oh yeah, I can get XYZ through this process. And the other person is not even on that same wavelength whatsoever as to what the results of a state-based divorce could actually look like.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think that people who have not been to court will avoid prenups, but in the moment they realize what court looks like, they will do anything and everything to avoid going to court.
Exactly. That's my primary motivation every single day when I'm in, I have like 5-6 court appearances every day, hearings all the time. And all I can think about every day is I really want my brothers and sisters not to go through this process.
Yep.
I had a sister today just talking about the impact of divorce on her kids, and another husband just talking about how ruined he is in terms financially and in the community, and how the court process kind of just sucks the life out of you. And I don't wish that upon anyone, honestly.
Yeah. And in the Islamic divorce system, it's pretty much you have your talaq, maximum 3 months, maybe 9 months of pregnancy. That's the extent of the relationship, if you will. Okay,
Yeah.
you're not really butting heads for an extended period. But divorce in most states will take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, in the worst emotional state that you'll ever be in.
Subhanallah.
And so just kind of minimizing that and having, I really, I'm proud of those divorces that are kind of just, they don't even go to court.
Yeah.
You just have the paperwork filed. I mean, not all states allow for that if there's kids involved, but minimizing that as much as possible.
No, subhanAllah, you're right. It's from an Islamic perspective, it's like rip off the Band-Aid. And from the American legal process, it's like, no, we're gonna make you suffer and take this off as slowly as possible.
Yes.
Yeah. Subhanallah. I mean, what do you see any not negatives, I guess, any concerns of kind of the modern situation that we're in, right? Where you have men and women both primarily working. I mean, I think at this point we're probably over the majority, I believe, are going to be dual income households in the Muslim community. Do you see any negatives in prenuptial agreements for either party?
No, I don't see any negatives. What I do see is a lot of question marks and areas that people will be not concerned about, but they would like more information on it. So like if there's a dual income household and then one is putting away their job to be able to take care of children, be a stay-at-home mom, some cases stay-at-home dad, but it does happen as well. What's the financial arrangement going to be there? How is one party going to be compensated for all that lost time in their career? And then when they try to go back into the workforce 20 years later, 10 years later, however many years later, they're obviously going to be at a setback or a disadvantage, and it's a really important question to have. And so people can be very creative with how they come up with solutions for that, in terms of that's very different from using the marital property system or the community property system. So you can have like a compensation scheme where like for every month that you're working at home, you can have this much, for example. We can share this much. Like you take the law and the matters into your own hands.
Exactly.
And that's what matters. And it's not going to be like one method for it that works for all families. Every family can use their own methodology. And in the Islamic framework, there's still this mentality that, yes, we have our division of responsibilities, but we're kind of taking advantage collectively as a Muslim community, taking advantage of the mothers and the women who are providing in the household. And they're doing so with mercy and grace and love, and they're kind of doing so for free, and that's not necessarily a requirement for them to do so. And by having this conversation, you can kind of alleviate a lot of those concerns.
So let's actually double down on that scenario, right? Because that is one of the biggest concerns that we hear, is that if I'm a sister and I am going to be a housewife and I decide I'm going to stay home, I got my bachelor's degree, and now as soon as I got my bachelor's degree, I got married. And now 10, 15 years, 20 years, I've spent at home, raised the children. You mentioned one clause, a compensation clause, for example, but what other tools or what other creative structures could we use to make sure that sister feels secure if, God forbid, there is a divorce?
Yeah. There are like 3 or 4 that I generally kind of recommend. One is, and this is all assuming that all property is separate. So you're entering into this marriage as if you were not legally married. Let's just put it that way.
Sure.
One is during the time that the sister is not working, then the husband will share a portion of the salary. Another is not share like a percentage, but say, here's what I'm going to compensate you for all the time that you're spending for the family. The third one is, I may not have the means to be able to compensate because we're a single income household at this time. But if we do separate, I will allocate this much money for you in case we separate, which some people like to use as like a deferred mahr, but this is separate from the deferred mahr. I don't want to like convolute the two. The mahr is independent of that. Yeah. And then the last one would be not necessarily giving like a lump sum of, let's say you didn't work for 18 months, $1,000 per month would be $18,000. You could do like, I will spread that out over, months post, every month after we are separated and divorced, I will give you this much money for a period. So it looks like spousal support, but it's very different.
Yes. And it's because it's agreed upon up front.
It's agreed upon up front, and it had to do with what happened during the marriage, not necessarily what terms you're ending on.
Exactly. I think that's a good point. That's a really good point. Yeah. And I pretty much use the same models. Basically, if your income is reduced after having children for the sake of raising the children, and if your income is less than X amount of money, then for every month that you are out of the workforce, like you said, $1,000 per month post-divorce. But I guess one question I have is, you mentioned the compensation during the marriage. Is that something you put in prenups, and would that be enforceable to have provisions that talk about payments during the marriage?
Yeah, so sometimes it is put into the prenuptial agreement. The test of enforceability, I have not tested is enforceability, but I've seen other attorneys do it as well. But what it does help with, let's say it's not enforceable.
Yeah.
It's in the agreement.
Yes.
And if they're looking for reconciliation or looking to have a proper Islamic judgment, their first task or their first thing they do is not going to go to court and test its enforceability. Yeah. They're going to go to a Muslim arbitrator, a Muslim judge, or someone to be able to figure out, okay, what are the rights of both parties?
Yeah.
And they're going to use that agreement, even if it's not legally enforceable.
I can see it being enforceable in terms of categorizing it as a debt, right? Like basically this amount that should have been paid, let's say you didn't pay it, that should have been paid is now something that you have to pay post divorce. So it's a type of maintenance, I guess, but it's really more so of a debt that's owed to your spouse if you didn't pay it during your marriage. And so I'm sure there would be ways to craft it for enforceability.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There are definitely ways to craft it. If it's perceived as like the spousal support during the marriage, it may be less enforceable. But if it's drafted or as a debt, then 100% would be.
Yeah. SubhanAllah. What about from the husband side? Do you see any negatives or any question marks, as you kind of mentioned earlier, from the husband's perspective when coming into a prenuptial agreement?
You're saying if there are any areas of concern or like...
Yeah.
I do not see any areas of concern, honestly. I see a lot more structure, which is generally speaking what husbands are kind of looking for when they are entering into a marriage. So I don't see any negatives to it.
Another thing I kind of, as a response to, I've heard this response to this whole discussion about a wife not working and raising the kids, and then at the end of the divorce, being a little behind when it comes to work experience and education. One of the retorts that I've heard is, well, the husband was paying for rent, food, shelter, clothing, etc. during that time. Is that compensation enough or not?
Yeah. Do you mind just rephrasing the question or repeating the question?
I guess it's more of a comment, and I guess more of whether you agree with this notion or not, that so the first framework was there's a big question mark when a wife stays home and sacrifices her career in order to raise the children.
Yeah.
A husband might argue, well, yes, you're staying home, you're not progressing in your career. However, all of your expenses are being paid for during that period. do you have any comments, or do you believe that that is a good retort to the negative implication a sister might have when they are sacrificing their career?
Yeah, I mean, many people don't realize it until like probably their like the middle age life, like in your 30s or 40s. But having a sense of like financial security is not something to underestimate.
Hmm.
And when a spouse is being provided for financially, that means the burden of the rat race is on the other party. And that's something that kind of needs to be appreciated, I feel. I mean, there's appreciation for the burden of the rat race on one side, but then there's also the appreciation for all the family and foregoing of the career and all that on the other side as well. This understanding of Islamic roles and responsibilities, and in the context of the American framework, really helps. I think that having these conversations in a prenup context help the couple have a higher appreciation for each other and the sacrifices that they're doing.
SubhanAllah. What do you think the community needs to do to make prenups more acceptable?
Yeah, I mean, the branding is definitely something that needs to be discussed. Some said maybe we should call it a merit. You said that you spoke with a sheikh and said it was a marital contract as opposed to a prenuptial agreement. So I love the idea of a marital agreement, a marital agreement, or a marital contract, as long as it doesn't, like, people don't convolute the two and think that you can just get a prenup on the day of the marriage.
Yeah.
That's one. Two, I think in our communities we need to have a lot more like presentations and explanations as to what the court system looks like with the current state of our lives, not having agreements in place, and then what you can save yourself from by having such an agreement. So one is having a legal reality check, and two is branding.
And I think something that both of us are involved in is education, right? Like, you mentioned the seminars, but I think educating not only the general public, but also the community leaders themselves, and maybe, both of us, inshallah, or whatever, to really hone in on the shuyukh and the scholars in the community, and, teaching them about the realities of the legal system and how a prenuptial agreement can help. And, so I think education is a really big component of making prenuptial agreements more acceptable.
Yeah, I spoke with a scholar 2 days ago, and he's like, why I think you need to be presenting this to all the scholars in the country, so that they know that this is actually a good thing.
Yes.
Most scholars, I think, have bought into the negative stigma with prenups. But then once they understand how it works and what it's intending, they might come up with a fatwa saying it's wajib,
No, I heard that AMJA did the most recent AMJA, I think, was on family law and prenuptial agreements. And so, I mean, that's really good to hear. Like I said, the shuyukh that I met in Dallas talked about reowning and taking back the narrative on marriage contracts. What about from like a cultural perspective? I'm not sure what your background is, but like, from a Desi perspective, what culturally, how can we make it more acceptable to perhaps maybe, our generation is bought into it, but our parents' generation, who are the ones who are kind of still involved in their children's marriages, how do we make it more acceptable to them?
Yeah. Well, one, many of our, let's say, immigrant family base has this fear of courts.
Yes.
And I'm not saying we should use that. Well, some people, with the stick, some people with the carrot, you got to. And the more we talk about the harms, the more inclined they are to pursue a prenuptial agreement, if that makes sense. And then there are others, and I found this a lot of, I'm from an Iranian background. So there are some shared experiences as well. I found that a lot of people who come to me looking for prenuptial agreements, they're like, we're trying to save our child from our inheritance that's going to them so that their spouse doesn't get it.
Yeah.
There's already so much to unpack there.
Yeah.
Both in terms of like you've bought into some legal myths that don't. But that fear has had a positive impact on them, at least having this conversation.
Yeah.
And if there are made up statistics that we can come up with that say that prenuptial agreements help preserve the marriage,
Yeah. We should do a study.
we should definitely pursue that.
Yeah.
I mean, we're moving in that direction towards counseling, right? Premarital counseling, that was not a thing 10, 20, 30 years ago, right? And I'm seeing that families, whether it's like immigrant families, second generation families, they're slowly buying into that. So this is just another step. And the more, let's say, we have relationships with premarital counselors, they also understand how prenups work. They will promote that with their own clients.
I mean, I'm almost of the opinion that states shouldn't get involved in marriages to begin with, but I'd be out of a job, which is fine. That's my whole goal, actually. My whole goal is to stop doing divorce litigation and have enough prenups that I can have the same lifestyle, but we'll see how
exactly. I mean, it's all a game. And the name of the game is stay out of court as much as possible. And we have this with marital agreements. We also have this with inheritance, right? So like wills and trusts, there's a whole conversation there about what helps us avoid court at all costs.
Yes.
Mediation, arbitration, like this, there's a whole area of law on how to not go to court.
What do you see? Sorry to interrupt you. But what do you see kind of what does the future look like in the Muslim community as it relates to marriage, divorce, prenups, this type of thing?
Yeah, I think that we are slowly going to be taking our own religious laws and experiences into our own hands as a community, and that's a very good thing. In every part of it, from the marriage itself to the inheritance part, to the disputes, the conflicts, keeping it within the community and confidential, inshallah, that is a beautiful thing. Our communities will start to become more self-sustaining, more autonomous. It doesn't go to other attorneys or even I don't say non-Muslim, but other individuals who are using your difficulties to make a buck.
Yeah.
And I mean, we have other religious minorities and communities in the country that have lived by this for decades, for centuries.
Oh yeah. So, robust systems. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. So if we're not doing it, then that's just
shame on us.
Foolishness.
Yeah. 100%. Anything else to add about prenups, how they can help with compatibility, or just prenups in general that you think we may have missed in this conversation?
I think our audience already has a lot to kind of unpack. I always find that to be the case.
Yeah.
The one thing I think we kind of briefly mentioned in the very beginning is that it's not about having the final agreement signed and notarized. It's not about bringing it up in court. Most marriages will probably be fixed or start off on the right foot if these conversations happen, regardless of whether you sign paperwork.
Subhanallah. No, that's awesome, man. I definitely agree with you. That conversation is almost as powerful or even more powerful than the piece of paper. Yeah. That's a really good point. Yeah. And, just to add kind of on the future of the Muslim community, I do think that Muslims are one of the last few groups of people who are going to continue to get married, right? I don't know if they're going to continue to get married through the legal system or not, but they are going to continue to get married as our deen really encourages getting married. I think that the divorce rate is going to meet the divorce rate of the broader community, unfortunately. And as you mentioned, I do hope, inshallah, in the next few years, that we do see more institutions that are there to help resolve differences. I know, for example, I'm a consultant for IAMS in Dallas, for example, and I'm sure there's a few others, but they haven't really sprung out yet, right? And I'm really praying for those, and maybe myself, just to be part of one, to start arbitration centers and mediation centers and have our own systems in place that are professional, that have some weight behind them, and can be registered in the court system if they need to be, and not have kind of this, I hate to say it this way, but like kind of uncles running the court, like really have it where it's professionally driven with attorneys and scholars and
Yeah.
psychologists and CPAs and kind of all the professionals needed to really implement Islamic law. And I was actually thinking, from a colonization perspective, you know, in India and Pakistan, I can say India as my parents are from India. One of the things they left was the Islamic family law and took away almost everything else. And I kind of reflect upon that as to why. Why would the colonizers disband all the wuku, awqaf, disband all of the rest of the Islamic law, but they allowed family law to stay? And I think this is my perspective, and if you have a perspective, that family is such a private thing, marriage is such a private communal institution, that it didn't make sense for a government to usurp it. But now we've come to a point where now the government has even usurped, your family, your children, your marriage, and I'm thinking that it's going to swing back the other way, inshallah.
Yeah, it definitely will. And one question I think that will help open the eyes of I guess, the general American population is, do you even have to get legally married?
Yeah.
You don't.
You don't.
You just don't. Yeah, right? It's just like, okay, I just have to go. This is the protocol. I get legally married. I have to get Islamically married. I have to get legally married. I have to go do the X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
You don't. I mean, some states will identify you as a married couple based on
Regardless.
common marriage, but that's not always
Yeah.
applicable, right? And so just kind of challenging that initial framework that, do you really have to buy into this marital system? No, you don't. You're choosing to avail yourself to that. You're choosing to let someone else judge over your family dynamic, right? And that it is an active choice, and so we need to take responsibility for that individually and as a community. And you can take it as a joke, may not be a joke, but the number one cause of divorces, or like 100% cause of divorces, is marriage.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Subhanallah. Yeah, and even I've kind of wrestled with this whole thing about legal marriage, and yeah, you definitely don't have to get legally married. I know in Illinois it's illegal to perform an unlicensed marriage, right? No, I've never seen anybody get arrested for it. I've never seen anybody charged for it. But you're in certain states, I'm sure it's on the books that it's illegal to do an unlicensed marriage. And a nikah ceremony is probably going to be considered a marriage. But you're right. There's nothing forcing us to go to the courthouse, get a piece of paper, and basically hand your family over to the state to decide what happens if this arrangement breaks down. SubhanAllah. No, really good point. Really good point.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I know in some states like California, all they say is like, you're not considered married unless you do this exact process.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm not going to do that process.
Yeah.
Sure, you lose out on some like tax benefits, and that's why like marriage is mostly for financial reasons.
Yeah.
Legal marriage.
SubhanAllah. Any final words, bro?
That's all.
Alhamdulillah. No, Jazakallah khair. Really appreciate you taking the time out. It was great to meet you. Inshallah, I hope we can do many more programs together. Seems like we're on the same page, have the same mission, inshallah. So the more we can collaborate, inshallah, we can make a positive impact if Allah wills.
Inshallah. The pleasure was mine. I'm glad to be in sync with you and in line with your mission as well, inshallah.
Alhamdulillah. Jazakumullahu khairan to all of you for joining. If you have any comments, if you have any questions, feel free to post them on our Instagram. Keep an eye out for other programs that we're doing. We do have a prenup, a more academic look at prenups coming up in July. It'll be a class, inshallah, I think it's a 6-hour class, inshallah, on prenuptial agreements. So keep a lookout for that. You can find our Ustad here online. If you can plug kind of where you're available and where we can find the work that you're doing, inshallah.
Myself, yeah. So I do workshops across the country at different places. So I was just in Chicago 2 days ago doing a nikah and law workshop. So Islamic Law Institute is the institution that my wife and I made, that we help people fulfill their Islamic obligations within an American legal system. And there are different versions of that everyone, alhamdulillah, is contributing to that goal. So if you want to follow Islamic Law Institute to get more information, please do so.
الحمد لله. جزاكم الله خيرا. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام.